A homeless Navy SEAL thought he'd lost everything, until his dog uncovered a secret powerful men would kill to keep buried. Evicted at 59, a homeless Navy SEAL made a home in a mountain tunnel. His dog found a secret. Deep in Montana's frozen Bitterroot Mountains, former Navy SEAL Caleb Mercer and his loyal canine Ghost were surviving one brutal winter night at a time. But when Ghost became obsessed with a hidden wall inside an abandoned railroad tunnel, he uncovered something that would expose a century-old conspiracy, reclaim a stolen ranch, and change both their lives forever. Comment 1 if you believe a loyal dog can save a life, or 0 if you think Caleb should have given up, and tell us where you're watching from. The storm had been raging for nearly 12 hours. Snow hammered the Bitterroot Mountains with a relentless fury, turning the world beyond the tunnel entrance into a white void. Wind screamed through the canyon like a living thing, hurling icy powder against stone and pine. The temperature had fallen below 0, and darkness had swallowed the mountains long before evening. Deep at an abandoned railroad tunnel carved into the mountainside more than a century. Earlier, Caleb Mercer sat beside a cast-iron wood stove and listened to the storm. The stove glowed faintly red. The small fire inside crackled and popped. Shadows danced along the rough stone walls. For a moment, the tunnel almost felt peaceful. Almost. Then came the scratching again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Caleb closed his eyes. There it was. The same sound, the same wall, the same obsession. For the third night in a row, he slowly lifted his head and looked deeper into the tunnel. About 60 feet beyond the stove, where the old railroad passage widened slightly. Before disappearing into darkness, a large German shepherd stood with his paws against a section of rock, scratching, digging, whining, ignoring everything else. Ghost. The dog didn't move. Ghost. Nothing. The German shepherd continued clawing at the stone. Dust drifted from the wall. Tiny pebbles bounced across the floor. Caleb sighed. The dog was usually the most disciplined creature he'd ever known. For nearly 8 years, Ghost had obeyed commands under conditions most people couldn't imagine. Gunfire, explosions, helicopters, combat patrols. The dog had never broken focus, until now the scratching continued. Caleb pushed himself out of the chair. At 59, his body still carried the strength of a Navy SEAL, but time had left its marks. Old injuries protested every movement. A bullet wound in his shoulder, a damaged knee from Afghanistan, a back that reminded him every morning exactly how many years had passed. He grabbed a lantern and walked toward the dog. The yellow light illuminated Ghost's powerful frame. The shepherd's muzzle had turned gray with age. A long scar crossed the left side of his face. One ear remained permanently nicked from shrapnel. The scarred dog looked like a veteran because he was one. Ghost stopped scratching long enough to glance back. Amber eyes met Caleb's. There was something unusual in them. Not fear, not aggression, urgency. Then the dog turned back to the wall and resumed digging. "You're gonna wear your paws down to nothing," Ghost whined softly. Caleb raised the lantern. The wall looked ordinary. Rough mountain stone, moisture stains. Nothing special, nothing worth losing sleep over. He tapped the rock with his knuckles, solid, cold, unremarkable. Probably a rabbit den behind there. Ghost ignored him. The dog pressed his nose against a crack between 2 sections of stone, sniffed, scratched again, then whined louder. Caleb frowned. That wasn't normal. Not for Ghost. Not after all these years. The dog wasn't acting curious. He was acting desperate. For several moments, Caleb simply stood there watching. The storm howled outside. The lantern flickered. Ghost scratched until his breathing grew heavy. Finally, Caleb crouched beside him. His gloved hand rested gently on the dog's neck. "Partner, whatever's back there can wait until morning." The shepherd leaned briefly against him, then immediately returned to the wall. Caleb laughed softly despite himself. Stubborn old fool. Ghost's tail moved once, almost as if he agreed. The former SEAL switched off the lantern and returned toward the stove. The tunnel had become home over the past 3 months. Not because he wanted it to, because life had left him few alternatives. The old railroad tunnel stretched nearly 300 feet into the mountain. Most of it had partially collapsed decades earlier. Only the front section remained accessible. At first, it had been little more than shelter from the weather. Now it was something else. A place built with determination. A place built by survival. Stone flooring covered much of the ground. Crude wooden shelves lined one wall. A sleeping platform stood near the stove. Firewood was stacked neatly. Water containers sat beside a filtration system Caleb had assembled from salvaged materials. Nothing was luxurious. Everything was earned. The tunnel reflected the man who lived inside it. Simple, practical, hard to destroy. Yet tonight something felt wrong. Caleb sat down again. Ghost kept scratching, minute after minute. The noise echoed through the tunnel. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Eventually, Caleb reached for a battered metal mug resting near the stove. The coffee inside had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Outside, the blizzard intensified. Snow swirled across the canyon. Trees bent beneath the wind. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch snapped with a sharp crack. Ghost immediately stopped scratching. The shepherd's head lifted, ears forward, body rigid. Caleb noticed instantly. Military instincts never truly disappeared. He quietly set the mug down. The dog listened, motionless. Then Ghost relaxed. Whatever he had heard wasn't a threat. He returned to the wall. Caleb shook his head. "You're killing me tonight." The dog ignored him. Again, hours passed. The fire settled lower. The storm continued. Near midnight, Caleb finally crawled beneath heavy blankets on the sleeping platform. Ghost remained by the wall, still digging, still whining, still refusing to quit. The scratching became part of the darkness, part of the silence, part of the mountain itself. Caleb stared at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. His mind drifted where he hated it drifting, backward, to deserts, to gunfire, to smoke, to faces that never left. The nightmares always waited. Some nights were better than others. Tonight wasn't one of them. He closed his eyes. Immediately memories surfaced. A convoy, a roadside explosion, screaming over a radio, blood, the smell of burning metal. Caleb's breathing quickened. His hands tightened around the blanket. The familiar pressure began building inside his chest. Ghost appeared instantly. The scratching stopped. The dog crossed the tunnel without a sound. One moment, Caleb was alone. The next, 70 pounds of German Shepherd climbed onto the platform. Ghost pressed his body firmly against Caleb's side. The trained behavior had saved him countless times. Grounding, pressure therapy, focus, reality. Caleb placed a hand on the dog's neck. Slowly his breathing steadied. The panic retreated. The tunnel returned, the stove, the wind, the mountain, the present. Ghost remained beside him until the worst passed. Then, unbelievably, the dog climbed off the platform and returned to the wall. Scrape, scrape. Caleb stared after him. "You really aren't giving this up, are you?" The shepherd never looked back. Sometime after midnight, Caleb finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The storm continued outside. Snow piled higher against the entrance. Wind rattled the canyon, and deep within the tunnel, Ghost continued digging. Hour after hour, driven by something invisible, something hidden, something only he seemed able to sense. Just before dawn, Caleb woke suddenly, not from a nightmare, from silence. The scratching had stopped. The tunnel felt strangely still, too still. Caleb sat upright. The fire had nearly died. Gray morning light barely filtered through the entrance, far away. Then he saw Ghost. The dog wasn't digging anymore. He was sitting perfectly still in front of the wall, watching it, not moving, not blinking, just staring. Every muscle tense, every instinct focused, as if waiting, as if listening, as if something behind that stone was finally answering him. And for the first time since this strange obsession had begun, Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Because Ghost had faced enemy fighters. Bombs, gunfire, mountain lions, blizzards. Nothing had ever frightened him. But now, staring at that wall, the old war dog looked concerned. And Ghost was almost never wrong. Outside, the first light of morning touched the snow-covered peaks. Inside the tunnel, Caleb slowly rose to his feet. The dog never looked away from the stone. Something was hidden there. Something important enough to keep a battle-tested military K9 awake for 3 straight nights. Something buried long ago. And whatever it was, Ghost wasn't going to stop until he found it. Neither of them knew it yet. But that wall was about to change everything. 3 months earlier, there had been no tunnel, no snow-covered canyon, no wood stove glowing in the darkness, no stone floor built by desperate hands. Back then, Caleb Mercer still had a home. The ranch sat on nearly 60 acres outside the mountain town of Red Creek, Montana, where the Bitterroot Mountains rose like ancient guardians against the horizon. Every morning, sunlight spilled across open meadows dusted with dew. Pine-covered ridges framed the property. A narrow creek wound through the western pasture, its waters clear enough to reveal every smooth stone beneath the surface. For most people, it looked like an ordinary ranch. For Caleb, it was sacred ground. The first light of dawn found him standing beside a fence line, coffee steaming in his hand while Ghost trotted through the tall grass nearby. The German shepherd moved with quiet confidence, older now, slower than he had once been, but still alert, still watching, still protecting. Caleb smiled as Ghost disappeared briefly among the horses grazing near the northern field. A chestnut mare named Daisy lifted her head. Ghost circled her calmly. The mare snorted. Ghost wagged his tail once. The routine repeated almost every morning. The horses accepted him as part of the ranch. The ranch accepted him as part of its rhythm. And Caleb accepted that this simple life was probably the closest thing to peace he would ever find. The war had ended years ago. The war inside him had not. At 59, Caleb carried himself like a man who had spent a lifetime preparing for danger. Broad shoulders, weathered face, gray beginning to spread through his dark hair. His eyes remained sharp, constantly scanning, constantly assessing. The habits of a Navy SEAL never fully disappeared. Neither did the scars. Some were visible, most were not. Ghost understood all of them. The dog always knew. On bad days, he knew before Caleb did. Especially the nightmares. Especially the panic attacks. Especially the moments when the past reached through time and grabbed hold of him. The ranch helped. But the ranch wasn't the reason he stayed. His eyes drifted toward the hill overlooking the eastern pasture. There, beneath a lone cottonwood tree, stood a simple white marker. Emily Mercer, beloved wife, beloved friend, forever home. The sight of it still hurt. 6 years later, it still hurt. Caleb finished his coffee and started walking. Ghost immediately appeared at his side. Together they crossed the field. The grass brushed against their boots and paws. The morning air smelled of pine and earth. By the time they reached the hill, sunlight had begun spreading across the valley. Caleb stopped beside the grave. For several moments he simply stood there. Ghost sat quietly beside him. No commands needed. The dog understood. "You would have liked this morning," Caleb said softly. The wind moved gently through the cottonwood branches. No answer came. It never did. But Caleb talked anyway. He always did. Some mornings he told Emily about the horses. Some mornings about the weather. Some mornings about nothing at all. Today he spoke about Ghost. He chased a deer yesterday. Ghost lifted his head. Caleb chuckled. "You did." The dog looked offended. "You absolutely did." Ghost leaned against his leg. The laughter faded. The silence returned. Caleb stared at the marker. Cancer had taken Emily slowly. Cruelly, the disease had stolen pieces of her one by one. First her strength, then her energy, then her future. He had faced enemy fire, watched friends die, survived explosions. None of it prepared him for sitting beside a hospital bed and being unable to save the person he loved most. That helplessness never left him. Neither did the guilt. Sometimes he wondered if he should have retired earlier, spent more time with her, taken fewer deployments, missed fewer anniversaries. The questions never ended. The answers never came. Ghost nudged his hand. Caleb blinked. The memory faded. The present returned. Yeah, I know. The dog stood. Business resumed. Life moved forward. It always did. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Caleb repaired a fence damaged by a recent storm, fed the horses, cleaned equipment. Simple work, honest work, the kind that kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering. By noon, clouds had drifted over the mountains. Ghost followed him everywhere, always close, always watching. The bond between them had been forged years earlier in Afghanistan, a bond written in blood and survival. Most military handlers trusted their dogs. Caleb trusted Ghost with his life, because Ghost had already saved it, more than once. The first time happened during a patrol through a narrow valley. The dog had detected an explosive device seconds before disaster. The second time was worse. A hidden gunman, a burst of gunfire. Ghost had launched himself forward without hesitation. The scar across his face came from that day. The scar on Caleb's shoulder came from that day too. Neither one had forgotten. Neither one ever would. That afternoon, Caleb drove into Red Creek. The town was small, one main street, a diner, a gas station, a hardware store, a church, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. Caleb stopped at Murphy's Diner for lunch. Ghost waited patiently in the truck. The waitress smiled as Caleb entered. Afternoon, Caleb. Afternoon, Linda, the usual? Always. She poured coffee. He sat near the window. For a little while, everything felt normal. Comfortable. Predictable. Then the fireworks started. A sudden explosion cracked somewhere outside. Another followed. Then another. The local high school football team had won a playoff game. Students were celebrating downtown. The sound hit Caleb like a hammer. His body reacted before his mind could. Muscles tightened. Breathing changed. Heart accelerated. For a split second, the diner disappeared. The mountains disappeared. Montana disappeared. He was somewhere else. Somewhere hot. Somewhere dangerous. The sound of explosions echoed through memory. His vision narrowed. Sweat formed on his neck. Then a familiar shape appeared outside the window. Ghost. The dog had climbed halfway into the truck's front seat, watching him. Waiting. The connection grounded him instantly. Reality returned. The football celebration resumed being exactly what it was. Kids, noise, fireworks, nothing more. Caleb exhaled slowly. Linda noticed. You okay? He nodded. Just loud, she didn't press. People in Red Creek knew Caleb had served. Most were polite enough not to ask questions. After lunch, he returned home. The mountains glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Ghost rested in the passenger seat. Everything appeared exactly as it always had. Yet something invisible had already begun moving toward him. Something he couldn't see. Something waiting just beyond the horizon. That evening, Caleb sat on the porch overlooking the valley. Ghost lay beside his chair. The sky turned orange, then purple, then dark blue. Stars emerged one by one. The ranch settled into silence. It felt permanent, unshakable, safe. Caleb believed it would always be there. The house, the land, the horses. Emily's grave beneath the cottonwood tree. The future seemed simple. Manage the ranch. Grow old. Take care of Ghost. Visit Emily every morning. Nothing more, nothing less. The thought comforted him. Inside the house, a framed photograph rested on the mantel. Caleb and Emily, younger, laughing, arms wrapped around each other. Ghost as a puppy sitting between them. A frozen moment from another lifetime. Caleb stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he smiled. A rare smile. A genuine one. Outside, Ghost suddenly lifted his head. His ears rotated forward. The dog stared toward the darkness beyond the pasture. Watching, listening, alert. Caleb noticed. What is it? Ghost remained still. The shepherd's gaze fixed on something invisible in the distance. After several seconds, he relaxed. The moment passed. Caleb shrugged. Probably a deer, probably nothing. He couldn't know that far away, hidden behind office doors and legal paperwork, decisions had already been made. Documents had already been signed. Plans had already been set in motion. People he trusted were already betraying him, and the peaceful ranch he loved more than anything in the world was already beginning to slip away. The mountain night deepened, the stars brightened. Caleb sat beside Ghost beneath the porch light. Neither one realized these were among the last truly peaceful days they would ever spend there, because soon everything Caleb believed was secure would begin to unravel. And when it did, the only thing he would have left was the dog lying beside him. The trouble began quietly. Not with lawyers, not with court orders, not with developers. It began with trust. The kind of trust that forms over decades, the kind that feels impossible to break. 2 weeks after the peaceful evening on the porch, Caleb underwent surgery on his left knee. Years of military service had finally caught up with him. The procedure itself was routine, nothing life-threatening, nothing dramatic, but recovery meant weeks of limited mobility. For a man used to handling everything himself, that was difficult. Fortunately, family was willing to help, or so he thought. His cousin Derek Mercer arrived at the hospital carrying coffee and concern. At 48, Derek was younger than Caleb by more than a decade. Clean-cut, friendly, good with people, the sort of man who always knew exactly what to say. Growing up, they had spent summers fishing together. Derek had attended Caleb and Emily's wedding. After Emily died, he had been one of the few relatives who stayed in touch. At least, that's what Caleb believed. "How's the knee?" Derek asked while sitting beside the hospital bed. "Feels like somebody hit it with a truck." Derek laughed. "Probably because somebody did." Caleb smiled. For a while they talked about ordinary things. The ranch, the weather, the horses, Ghost. The dog was lying beside the bed, refusing to leave. Several nurses had already fallen in love with him. One had secretly brought him a hamburger earlier that morning. Ghost accepted the attention politely, but never stopped watching Caleb. Derek scratched the dog's ears. Ghost tolerated it, barely. "You know," Derek said casually, "you should probably let me help with some paperwork while you're laid up." Caleb frowned. "What paperwork?" "Property taxes, utility bills, insurance stuff. Nothing major. Everything's handled." "Sure. Normally." Derek leaned back in the chair. "But what if something happens?" Caleb rolled his eyes. "I'm not dying. I know that." Derek smiled. "I'm just saying it's smart planning." The conversation seemed harmless, reasonable, practical, exactly the way Derek intended. Over the next several weeks, he became a regular presence, helping around the ranch, running errands, handling paperwork, picking up supplies, checking the mail. Each visit seemed like an act of kindness. Each favor strengthened Caleb's trust. Ghost, however, never seemed comfortable around him. The dog wasn't aggressive. He never growled, never barked, never threatened. Yet whenever Derek arrived, Ghost watched him carefully. The way a sentry watches a stranger approaching a gate. Caleb noticed it once. Derek's family buddy. Ghost continued staring. The shepherd wasn't convinced, but Caleb dismissed it. He always had. The first warning came from Emily's old attorney, a gray-haired lawyer named Walter Briggs. Walter had handled family matters for years. One afternoon he called unexpectedly. "Caleb, I need to ask you something." "Sure, did you authorize a property review?" Caleb looked confused. "What property review?" There was a pause. "I received a request involving ownership records." Caleb frowned. "No," Walter hesitated. "Interesting. Why?" "The request came from someone representing your interests." A strange feeling settled in Caleb's stomach. "Who?" "Derek Mercer." The silence stretched. Finally, Caleb shrugged. "Probably helping with paperwork." Walter didn't sound convinced. "Maybe." After hanging up, Caleb mentioned it to Derek. The explanation came immediately, effortlessly. "Oh, that's for tax planning." "Tax planning?" Property values are changing around here. Derek shrugged. I'm trying to save you money. The answer sounded reasonable. Caleb accepted it. Ghost didn't. The dog sat beside the porch steps, watching Derek drive away. His ears remained forward long after the truck disappeared. Weeks passed. Recovery improved. Life resumed. Then the letters started arriving. The first one looked official. Caleb opened it at the kitchen table. Halfway through reading, he stopped. Read it again. Then a third time. The words refused to make sense. Property transfer notification. Ownership adjustment. Pending development review. His confusion deepened. The ranch had not been sold. He hadn't transferred anything. He certainly hadn't approved development. Ghost lifted his head from beneath the table. The dog sensed the change immediately. Caleb picked up the phone. Called Derek. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. By evening, anxiety had settled heavily over the house. The next morning, Caleb drove into Red Creek. Snow clouds hung low over the mountains. Ghost rode beside him. They went directly to Walter Briggs' office. The old attorney read the documents slowly. His expression grew darker with each page. Finally, he removed his glasses. Caleb. The tone alone made Caleb's pulse quicken. What? Walter exhaled. You need to see something. He opened a folder. Inside were copies of signed documents, property authorizations, transfer agreements, development approvals. Every page carried Caleb's signature. His heart sank. No, Walter nodded grimly. I'm afraid so. No. Caleb grabbed the papers, examined them. His signature was there. Every single page, perfectly authentic, impossible to deny. His mind raced, then understanding struck. Hospital paperwork. Recovery paperwork. The documents Derek had brought. Stacks and stacks of forms during weeks of medication and painkillers. Pages Caleb barely remembered signing. Pages he trusted Derek to explain honestly. His hands tightened. He lied. Walter nodded. It appears so. Silence filled the office. Ghost stood beside Caleb's chair. The dog seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Walter continued carefully. The paperwork grants development rights through a holding company. What company? Walter handed him another page. Caleb stared at the name. Silver Ridge Development Group, a luxury resort corporation based in Colorado. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. The ranch, Emily's grave, the horses, everything, every memory, every piece of his life, all tied to those papers, all suddenly vulnerable. There has to be a mistake. Walter's eyes saddened. I wish there was. The next several days became a blur. Meetings, phone calls, legal consultations, questions without answers. Each conversation made things worse. The documents appeared legitimate. The signatures were valid. Witnesses existed. Notaries existed. The transfer process had been completed correctly, at least on paper. Fraud was obvious. Proving it was another matter. You can fight this, one attorney explained. Good. It could take years. Caleb's expression hardened. I don't care. It could also cost hundreds of thousands. That stopped him. Not because he feared losing money. Because he didn't have it. Most of his wealth existed inside the ranch itself. The land, the livestock, the property. Everything now trapped in legal uncertainty. Every path forward seemed impossible. Every option seemed designed to fail. That night, Caleb sat alone on the hill beside Emily's grave. Snowflakes drifted softly through the darkness. Ghost sat beside him. The wind moved through the cottonwood branches overhead. Caleb stared at the marker. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I should have known. Ghost leaned against him. I should have seen it. The dog remained silent, steady, present, the way he always was. Caleb lowered his head. For the first time in years, tears filled his eyes. Not because of money, not because of pride, because somebody he trusted had weaponized family, had used Emily's memory, had used his recovery, had used his trust. Ghost rested his head on Caleb's knee. The gesture nearly broke him. Far below, lights glowed across the ranch. The home Emily loved, the home Caleb had promised to protect, and somewhere beyond the mountains, Derek Mercer was preparing for the next step, the step that would destroy what remained of Caleb's world. As snow continued falling across the valley, Caleb finally understood something terrible. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't bad paperwork, it was betrayal. Deliberate, calculated, personal. And the people responsible weren't finished yet. They were only getting started. The first snow of November arrived early that year. A thin white layer covered the fences, rooftops, and rolling fields surrounding the Mercer Ranch. The mountains stood silent beneath gray clouds, and a cold wind swept across the valley. Caleb stood on the porch before sunrise, staring at the eastern hill. Emily's grave was barely visible beneath the fresh snow. Ghost sat beside him. The German shepherd's ears were forward, alert, watching, waiting. Over the past 3 weeks, the legal situation had deteriorated rapidly. Every attorney Caleb consulted told him essentially the same thing. The documents were suspicious. The circumstances looked wrong. The timing looked wrong. But suspicion wasn't proof. Derek had been careful, painfully careful. Every signature appeared valid. Every transfer appeared legal. Every approval had been witnessed. Every step had been documented. The system moved on paper, and on paper, Caleb was losing. He had spent countless nights sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing documents, searching for mistakes, searching for something, anything. Each time Ghost lay beneath the table, watching him, refusing to leave. The dog seemed to understand that something terrible was happening. The phone rang shortly after 8. Caleb answered immediately. It was Walter Briggs. The old attorney sounded exhausted. Caleb. The tone alone told him everything. His stomach tightened. What happened? A long silence followed. Then Walter spoke. The injunction request was denied. Caleb stared through the window. Outside, snow drifted across the pasture. So that's it, for now. So they can move forward? I'm afraid so. Caleb closed his eyes. The words felt unreal. The ranch had been in his family for generations. His grandfather had built the original barn. His father had expanded the property. He and Emily had rebuilt the house together after a storm damaged it years earlier. Every fence post held a memory. Every field held a story, and now strangers would soon own it. Walter's voice softened. I'm sorry. Caleb nodded, even though the attorney couldn't see him. I know. After the call ended, silence filled the house. Ghost slowly rose. The dog crossed the room and rested his head against Caleb's leg. Caleb looked down. A faint smile appeared. You already know, don't you? Ghost didn't move. The dog simply stayed there, present. Steady, loyal, the way he always was. 3 days later, the developers arrived. The convoy appeared just after noon. Several trucks, construction equipment, survey vehicles, a black SUV. Caleb saw them coming from nearly a mile away. The engines echoed through the valley. Ghost immediately moved to the front window. His posture stiffened. The old military dog recognized trouble. Caleb stepped onto the porch. The cold air hit his face. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky. The vehicles rolled through the ranch entrance and stopped near the barn. Doors opened. Men climbed out. Surveyors, contractors, security personnel, and one man in a tailored gray coat, the project manager. A stranger standing on Caleb's land. The sight ignited something deep inside him. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Something heavier. The feeling of being erased. The project manager approached politely. Far too politely. Mr. Mercer? Caleb said nothing. The man extended a hand. It remained hanging awkwardly in the air. Finally, he lowered it. I understand this is difficult. Ghost moved closer, positioning himself between Caleb and the stranger. The project manager noticed. So that's the famous dog. Ghost stared at him, unblinking. The man wisely took a step back. We're here to begin preliminary preparation. This ranch isn't yours, the man sighed. The court disagrees. Caleb's jaw tightened. The stranger continued. Construction won't begin immediately. Get off my land. More silence. The project manager looked genuinely uncomfortable. but not enough to leave. I'm just doing my job. Caleb looked across the valley. Survey flags were already appearing. Bright orange markers planted into frozen ground. The sight made his chest ache. Every flag felt like an insult. Every marker felt like a wound. By evening, workers had begun measuring boundaries, taking photographs, recording elevations, preparing for development, preparing to erase everything. The next morning, another letter arrived. This one contained the final notice: vacate the property. 7 days. 7 days to leave behind an entire life. 7 days to abandon Emily's grave. 7 days to surrender. That night, Caleb sat beside the wood-burning fireplace. Ghost lay at his feet. The house felt different now. Smaller, colder, like a place already becoming a memory. Caleb stared at a photograph resting on the mantel, Emily smiling beneath a summer sunset. The picture had been taken 12 years earlier. Before the illness, before the hospital visits, before the funerals, before everything changed. He picked up the frame, his thumb brushed across the glass. I failed you. The words escaped before he could stop them. Ghost immediately lifted his head. Caleb laughed bitterly. Yeah, I know. The dog stood, crossed the room, pressed against him, the old therapy behavior. Grounding, anchoring, saving. Caleb wrapped an arm around Ghost's neck. For several moments, neither moved. Outside, snow continued falling. The final week passed too quickly. Friends from town stopped by. Some offered help. Some offered sympathy. Most didn't know what to say. The ranch became strangely busy. People arrived carrying casseroles, coffee, warm handshakes, awkward conversations. Everyone seemed shocked. Nobody seemed capable of stopping it. Then came the final morning. The day everything ended. The sky was clear. Brilliant blue stretched above the mountains. Fresh snow sparkled across the valley. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt cruel. Caleb loaded the last of his belongings into his aging pickup truck. A duffel bag, several boxes, tools, photographs, Ghost's supplies, everything that remained of a lifetime. The house stood behind him, silent, empty. Ghost paced nearby, restless. The dog seemed agitated by the activity. Vehicles appeared shortly after 9. More security personnel, more representatives, more strangers. One by one they emerged, watching, waiting. The project manager approached again. Mr. Mercer. Caleb ignored him. The man hesitated, then quietly said, I'm sorry. For the first time, Caleb believed him. The apology changed nothing, but it sounded genuine. A small crowd gathered near the road. Neighbors, friends, people who had known Caleb and Emily for years. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. The atmosphere felt more like a funeral. Because in many ways it was. Before leaving, Caleb walked alone toward the eastern hill. Ghost followed immediately. The climb felt longer than usual. The wind had strengthened. Cottonwood branches swayed overhead. Finally, he reached the grave. Emily's marker stood beneath a blanket of snow. Caleb knelt. His knee protested sharply. He ignored it. For several moments, he simply looked at the stone, trying to memorize every detail, every curve, every letter, every imperfection. As though memory alone could preserve it, Ghost sat quietly beside him. The mountains stretched endlessly beyond the valley, beautiful, unchanging, indifferent. Caleb swallowed hard. I'll come back. The promise sounded fragile, uncertain, but he meant it. Ghost leaned against his shoulder. The gesture nearly broke him. Eventually, Caleb stood. The moment had come. There was nothing left to do, nothing left to fight. Not today. Together, they walked back down the hill, toward the truck, toward an uncertain future, toward homelessness, toward exile. Caleb climbed into the driver's seat. Ghost jumped into the passenger side. The dog immediately turned toward him, watching, waiting. The same way he had overseas, the same way he always did. Caleb started the engine. The ranch slowly disappeared behind him. The barn, the fields, the fences, the house, everything gone. As the truck rolled onto the highway, he glanced into the rearview mirror one final time. The valley shimmered beneath the winter sun. Emily's hill was barely visible in the distance. Then the road curved, the view vanished. And for the first time in his life, Caleb Mercer had nowhere left to go. The only certainty remaining sat beside him, a scarred old German shepherd who refused to abandon him. Neither of them knew it yet, but somewhere deep within the Bitterroot Mountains, an abandoned railroad tunnel was waiting. And inside that forgotten darkness, the next chapter of their lives was about to begin. The truck climbed steadily into the mountains. Miles passed beneath the tires. The familiar roads around Red Creek disappeared behind them. The valley gave way to dense forests of pine and fir. Snow-covered ridges rose higher with every turn. Ghost sat silently in the passenger seat. His amber eyes followed the landscape beyond the windshield. The old dog seemed calm. Caleb wished he felt the same. For the first time since returning home from military service decades earlier, he had no destination, no home, no plan, no future he could clearly see, only motion. The farther he drove, the more unreal everything felt. The ranch was gone. Emily's grave was behind him. The life he had spent years building had vanished in a matter of weeks. Every mile seemed to pull him farther away from the man he had once been. As afternoon faded, snow began falling again. The sky darkened. The temperature dropped. Caleb glanced at the fuel gauge. Less than half a tank remained. His money was limited, very limited. The legal battle had drained most of what he could access. What remained would not last long, certainly not through winter. Ghost suddenly lifted his head. The dog stared toward the mountains rising ahead. Caleb followed his gaze. A distant canyon appeared between two heavily forested ridges. Something about the view triggered a memory. An old memory, one he hadn't thought about in years. His grandfather, a fishing trip, a hidden railroad tunnel deep in the mountains. Caleb's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. He remembered it now. The tunnel had been abandoned long before he was born, part of a railroad route that never fully succeeded. The tracks had been removed decades earlier. The mountains had reclaimed most of it. Few people even knew it existed. His grandfather had shown it to him when he was 12 years old. A secret place, a forgotten place, a shelter. The memory lingered, an idea slowly forming. Not a good idea, not a comfortable idea, but perhaps the only one available. As darkness approached, Caleb turned onto an old logging road. The truck bounced over frozen ruts and patches of ice. Trees crowded closer. Branches brushed the sides of the vehicle. The wilderness swallowed the last signs of civilization. Ghost watched quietly, trusting, always trusting. After nearly 40 minutes, the road ended. Ahead stood a wall of forest. Beyond it, hidden among rock and shadow, waited the canyon. Caleb killed the engine. Silence immediately filled the world. Only the wind remained. The mountains felt enormous, ancient, indifferent. For a moment he simply sat there, listening, thinking, questioning his sanity. Then Ghost nudged his arm. Caleb looked at the dog. A faint smile appeared. Yeah, the dog wagged his tail once. Decision made. They grabbed supplies, flashlights, food, water, blankets, a small toolkit, the essentials. Then they started walking. Snow crunched beneath their boots. The forest grew darker with every step. The canyon appeared suddenly. A deep scar cut through the mountainside. Frozen waterfalls hung from the cliffs like crystal curtains. Wind echoed through the narrow passage. The place felt isolated from the rest of the world. Exactly what Caleb needed, and exactly what frightened him. The tunnel entrance emerged from darkness nearly 20 minutes later. It was larger than he remembered. Nearly 15 feet high, carved directly into the mountain. A black opening surrounded by weathered stone. Snow drifted against its edges. Ice clung to portions of the rock face. The darkness inside seemed endless. Ghost approached first. The shepherd sniffed carefully, explored, listened, then stepped inside. Caleb followed. The beam from his flashlight cut through the darkness. Dust floated through the air. The tunnel stretched deep into the mountain. Most of the old railroad bed remained intact, though time had damaged much of it. Collapsed sections appeared farther inside, broken timbers, loose stone, decay. Yet the front portion remained surprisingly stable. Most importantly, it was dry, protected, sheltered from the wind. Ghost trotted farther inside. His nails clicked softly against stone. Eventually, the dog stopped and looked back, almost as if saying, "Here." Caleb slowly turned in a circle. The place was cold, very cold, but it was shelter, a roof, a place to survive the night. Nothing more, nothing less. For the first time since leaving the ranch, a small measure of relief entered his chest. "Well, partner," his voice echoed softly. "I've stayed in worse places." Ghost wagged his tail. That first night tested both of them. The tunnel trapped cold like a giant stone refrigerator. Their breath remained visible. The ground felt frozen. The darkness seemed alive. Every sound echoed. Every drip of water sounded louder than it should. Caleb built a small fire near the entrance using fallen wood collected outside. The flames provided little warmth, but psychologically they mattered. The light pushed back the darkness, just enough. Ghost curled beside the fire, watching the tunnel, watching the entrance, watching everything. The old military instincts remained, always. Hours passed. The fire crackled softly. Snow fell outside. Night deepened. Then the nightmares came. They always came eventually. Caleb jerked awake sometime after midnight, heart racing, breathing hard, sweat despite the cold. For a moment he wasn't in Montana, he was back overseas. Gunfire, dust, screaming. The memories felt real, too real. His hands trembled. The tunnel disappeared. The past consumed everything. Then Ghost appeared. The dog immediately pressed against him. Solid, warm, present. The familiar pressure technique. The same one trained years ago. The same one that had prevented countless panic attacks. Caleb placed both hands into the dog's fur, focused on reality, focused on the tunnel, focused on the mountain, focused on Ghost. Slowly the nightmare loosened its grip. The shaking stopped. His breathing steadied. The present returned. For several minutes neither moved. Then Caleb whispered, "Thank you." Ghost licked his hand. The simple gesture nearly broke his heart. Because no matter what had happened, no matter what he had lost, the dog remained. Morning arrived cold and gray. Snow covered the canyon. The mountains looked untouched, pristine, beautiful. The tunnel looked less intimidating in daylight. Still rough, still primitive, but survivable. Caleb spent the day exploring, assessing, planning. The SEAL inside him took over: mission, resources, shelter, water, fire, security. The process felt familiar, comforting. He found a stream nearby that remained partially unfrozen. Fresh water, a good sign. He located deadfall suitable for firewood. Another good sign. The tunnel itself remained stable, even better. For the first time in days, he had a task, a purpose, something beyond grief. That evening, he built a more permanent fire ring, organized supplies, cleared debris, created a sleeping area. Small improvements. Nothing impressive, yet each one mattered. Each one represented survival. The second night proved easier. The third easier still. By the end of the week, Caleb had developed a routine. Collect firewood, gather water, improve shelter, repair equipment, care for Ghost. Stay moving, stay focused. Don't think too much. Don't remember too much. But grief has a way of finding people anyway. One evening, as snow fell quietly outside the tunnel entrance, Caleb sat alone staring into the fire. Ghost slept nearby. The flames reflected in the dog's scarred face. The sight triggered a memory. Emily laughing beside a campfire years earlier. Emily teaching Ghost basic commands as a puppy. Emily telling him that one day the dog would probably end up taking care of both of them. The memory hit harder than expected. The loneliness followed immediately, heavy, crushing, the kind that settled deep inside the bones. For the first time since arriving at the tunnel, surrender seemed tempting. A shelter in town, a veterans program, anywhere with walls and heat and people, anything easier than this. He stared into the fire for a long time, thinking, questioning, wondering if the fight was worth it. Then Ghost lifted his head. The dog crossed the tunnel, rested beside him. Nothing dramatic, no training, no commands. Just companionship, simple, pure, loyal. Caleb looked down at him. The dog stared back. And somehow the answer became clear. Not because life had improved, not because the pain had disappeared, because quitting would mean letting Derek win, letting the developers win, letting everything Emily believed about him die. Caleb slowly stood, walked to the entrance, looked out across the canyon. Snow drifted gently through moonlight. The mountains stood silent, endless, powerful, unbroken. For the first time since losing the ranch, he felt something unexpected. Not happiness, not peace, determination. The old, stubborn determination that had carried him through military training, through deployments, through Emily's illness, through every terrible chapter of his life. The tunnel would not be his grave. If he had to live here through winter, he would survive. If he had to rebuild from nothing, he would rebuild. The next morning, he began working in earnest. The tunnel was no longer temporary shelter. It was becoming home. Neither he nor Ghost realized it then. But the darkness surrounding them would soon give way to something neither of them expected. And deep inside the mountain, hidden beyond stone and time, a secret was already waiting for Ghost to find it. The first real snowstorm of December arrived overnight. By dawn, the canyon had disappeared beneath nearly a foot of fresh snow. The pine trees bowed under its weight. The frozen waterfalls glistened like silver glass. The world beyond the tunnel looked untouched by human hands. Beautiful, silent, dangerous. Caleb stood near the entrance, watching the snowfall. His breath drifted into the cold air. Ghost stood beside him. The old German shepherd seemed fascinated by the storm. Snowflakes landed on his muzzle. He blinked them away and looked mildly offended. For the first time in weeks, Caleb laughed. A real laugh. Short, unexpected, but real. Ghost looked up at him. His tail wagged once. Mission accomplished. The tunnel was no longer merely a place to survive. It was becoming something else. A project, a purpose, a challenge. And Caleb Mercer had always been at his best when facing challenges. Military training had taught him something simple. Hopeless situations become manageable when broken into smaller objectives. One task, then another, then another. Focus on the next problem, not the entire mountain. That morning he wrote a list inside an old notebook. Floor, storage, firewood, sleeping platform, water system, food, heat. The list wasn't ambitious. It was necessary. And necessity had always been one of his greatest motivators. The first project was the floor. The original tunnel ground consisted of uneven stone, dirt, and decades of debris. Walking across it at night was dangerous, especially in low light. Caleb spent days hauling flat rocks from nearby slopes, one at a time, sometimes two. His injured knee protested constantly. His back ached. His hands cracked from cold. Yet slowly, section by section, the floor improved. Ghost accompanied him on every trip. The dog carried small pieces of wood in his mouth. Not because he was ordered to, because he wanted to help. Caleb noticed. "You know you're not getting paid for this." Ghost dropped another piece of wood at his feet. The shepherd looked very pleased with himself. The stone floor expanded week after week. Each completed section created a sense of accomplishment, a visible victory. Proof that progress still existed. Proof that life could move forward, even here, especially here. The next challenge was firewood. Winter in the Bitterroots was unforgiving. Without reliable heat, survival became difficult. Caleb began collecting deadfall throughout the canyon. Fallen branches, broken trees, anything dry enough to burn. Ghost proved invaluable. The dog's nose seemed capable of locating wood hidden beneath snow. More than once, Caleb watched Ghost disappear into the trees and return carrying a branch twice his size. The sight always made him smile. One afternoon, while gathering wood along the canyon edge, Ghost suddenly froze. The change was immediate. His ears lifted, his posture stiffened. Every muscle became alert. Caleb recognized the signal instantly. Danger somewhere nearby. Slowly he followed the dog's gaze. Movement. Across a snowy ridge, a mountain lion. The big cat stood nearly 80 yards away, watching, silent. The animal's pale coat blended perfectly with the winter landscape. For several tense moments, neither predator nor dog moved. Ghost remained between Caleb and the ridge, protective, steady. The lion eventually turned and vanished among the trees. The moment passed, but Caleb never forgot it. Even here, Ghost was still protecting him, still doing his job, still standing watch. Days became weeks. The tunnel continued changing. The stone floor grew larger. Shelves appeared along one wall. A storage area took shape. A workbench emerged from salvaged lumber. Nothing fancy, nothing beautiful, everything practical, everything earned. By Christmas, the tunnel no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied, alive. One morning, Caleb discovered an old section of railroad track buried beneath debris. The rusted steel had likely remained hidden for decades. Using portions of it, he reinforced part of the sleeping platform. The project took nearly 3 days. When it was finished, he stepped back and admired the result. Not because it looked impressive, because it worked. That mattered more. Ghost jumped onto the platform immediately, tested it, turned in a circle, lay down, then refused to move. Caleb laughed. Well, I guess it's approved. Ghost closed his eyes, evaluation complete. Winter deepened. The storms grew stronger. Yet life inside the tunnel improved. A routine developed. Morning, gather wood, check water, inspect supplies. Afternoon, build, repair, improve. Evening, fire, coffee, silence. Ghost. For the first time since losing the ranch, Caleb found himself thinking less about what had been taken, and more about what remained. The difference was subtle, but important. One night a powerful blizzard struck the canyon. Wind roared through the mountains. Snow buried the entrance. Visibility vanished entirely. The storm continued for nearly 2 days. Caleb and Ghost remained inside, waiting, listening. The tunnel shook occasionally beneath the force of the wind. Ghost stayed unusually close. The dog seemed uneasy, restless. Caleb noticed. "You hear something?" Ghost looked toward the deeper sections of the tunnel. The shepherd remained focused there for several moments, then relaxed. Caleb dismissed it. Probably the storm. Probably shifting rock. Nothing more. Yet over the following days, he noticed something strange. Ghost had begun exploring farther into the tunnel. Not constantly, just occasionally. The dog would disappear for several minutes, then return. Caleb assumed he was following scents. Mice, perhaps. Small animals. Nothing unusual. Still, the behavior lingered in his mind. One evening, after a long day of hauling supplies, Caleb sat beside the stove drinking coffee. The fire cast warm orange light across the stone walls. Ghost lay nearby chewing on a piece of antler he had found weeks earlier. The scene felt peaceful, almost normal. Then something unexpected happened. Caleb realized he hadn't thought about Derek all day. Not once. The realization startled him. For months, anger had consumed everything. The betrayal, the loss, the humiliation. Yet now, sitting inside an abandoned tunnel, he had gone an entire day without replaying it, without reliving it, without feeding it. The discovery felt strange, liberating. Perhaps healing wasn't a destination. Perhaps it was simply a collection of small moments. Small victories, like building a floor, stacking firewood, sharing silence with a loyal dog. The thought stayed with him. That night, sleep came easier. No nightmares. No panic attacks. Just rest, the kind he hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, he woke before sunrise. The tunnel was quiet. The stove had burned low. The mountains beyond the entrance glowed faint blue beneath early light. Ghost was gone. Caleb sat up immediately. Ghost? No answer. He grabbed a flashlight. The beam swept across the tunnel. Then he spotted the dog, nearly 60 feet deeper inside. Standing motionless, watching something. Caleb frowned. Ghost wasn't sniffing, wasn't exploring, wasn't hunting. The dog simply stared into darkness, as if listening, waiting, studying. After several moments, Ghost turned and trotted back. Whatever had captured his attention remained hidden. The moment passed, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the following week, the behavior increased. Ghost spent more time exploring deeper sections of the tunnel, more time investigating, more time disappearing into shadows. At first, Caleb paid little attention. There were too many other tasks, too many immediate concerns. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dog's focus began shifting toward a specific area, a place deep within the mountain, a place neither of them understood. Yet, because while Caleb was busy building a fortress against winter, Ghost was unknowingly moving closer to the secret buried inside the mountain. And before long, the old war dog would discover something that had remained hidden for generations. January settled over the Bitterroot Mountains like a frozen blanket. The canyon had become a world of white and gray. Snow covered every ridge. Ice hung from the cliffs. The stream near the tunnel flowed beneath a shell of crystal. Most mornings, Caleb woke before sunrise. Not because he wanted to, because years of military service had programmed his body that way. The tunnel remained silent except for the occasional crackle of the stove. Ghost usually woke at the same moment. The old German shepherd would stretch, shake himself, and begin another day. Together, they had created something remarkable. Not comfort, not luxury, but stability. The tunnel now felt less like an emergency shelter, and more like a home. The stone floor covered most of the main chamber. Firewood was stacked neatly against one wall. The sleeping platform stood sturdy and dry. Shelves held food, tools, and supplies. For the first time since losing the ranch, Caleb felt useful again. Yet, usefulness and happiness were not the same thing. Because every night, after the work was finished, and the darkness settled around the mountain, another battle began. A battle nobody could see, not even Ghost, or so Caleb believed. One evening, snow drifted softly outside the tunnel entrance. The storm was gentle, almost peaceful. Caleb sat near the stove holding a photograph. The edges had become worn from years of handling. Emily smiled from the picture. Her dark hair moved in the wind. The mountains behind her glowed beneath a summer sunset. Ghost lifted his head. He knew that photograph. He had seen it countless times. Caleb stared at it quietly. The fire reflected in the glass. For a moment it almost looked as though Emily were moving, breathing, alive. The illusion lasted only a second. Then reality returned. The tunnel felt colder. The silence felt heavier. I should have been there. The words escaped before he realized he had spoken. Ghost immediately stood, crossed the tunnel, sat beside him. Caleb lowered the photograph. The familiar ache spread through his chest. It never truly left. Some days it was quieter. Some days it felt unbearable. Tonight was one of those nights. Emily had spent nearly 2 years fighting cancer. 2 years of treatments. 2 years of hope rising and falling. 2 years of pretending everything would somehow be okay. Toward the end, Caleb had retired completely from military contract work. He had been home every day, every hour, every minute, and still he felt like he had failed her. The guilt made no sense. The doctors had said so. Friends had said so. Emily herself had said so. Yet guilt rarely listened to logic, especially grief. Grief had its own rules. Caleb looked at Ghost. You know what's funny? The dog tilted his head. Everybody thinks losing the ranch is what broke me. Ghost remained silent. Caleb smiled sadly. They're wrong. The fire popped softly. Outside, snowflakes drifted through moonlight. The ranch hurt. His voice lowered. But losing Emily, he shook his head. The sentence never finished. It didn't need to. Ghost slowly rested his head on Caleb's knee. The old therapy behavior, simple, powerful, steady. Caleb rubbed the dog's ears. For several minutes, neither moved. Then Caleb placed the photograph back onto a shelf. The memory remained. The pain remained. But the storm inside him calmed slightly. at least for a while. The next morning began normally. Coffee, firewood, snow, the routine continued, yet something felt different. Ghost had become increasingly protective, more alert, more watchful. The dog frequently paused and stared deeper into the tunnel, sometimes for minutes at a time, as though listening, as though waiting. Caleb noticed but said nothing. The behavior wasn't alarming, just unusual. The tunnel had many strange sounds: dripping water, shifting stone, wind moving through hidden cracks. Ghost was probably investigating. At least that's what Caleb told himself. That afternoon, he worked on reinforcing part of the tunnel wall near the entrance. A recent storm had loosened several rocks. The work was slow, methodical, the kind of labor that kept dark thoughts away. Halfway through the project, the distant sound of explosions echoed through the canyon. Boom, boom, boom. Caleb froze. The hammer slipped from his hand. His breathing stopped. The sound came again. Boom. His vision narrowed instantly. The mountains disappeared. The tunnel disappeared. Everything disappeared. The canyon transformed into something else. A battlefield: dust, smoke, chaos. His pulse accelerated. Every muscle tightened. The familiar nightmare had arrived while he was awake. A pasty episode, one of the worst he'd experienced in months. The explosions continued, distant, muted, yet powerful enough. Later, he would learn the sound came from avalanche control work, conducted miles away by state highway crews. But in that moment, logic no longer existed. Only memory, only survival, only fear. Caleb stumbled backward. His hands trembled. The walls felt too close. The air felt thin. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Then Ghost appeared. Instantly. The dog moved with practiced precision. Years of training activated automatically. Ghost pressed firmly against Caleb's legs, then leaned harder, grounding pressure, anchoring reality. The behavior had been trained years ago with military therapists. The purpose was simple: interrupt the spiral. Reconnect handler to the present. Ghost nudged Caleb's hand, again then again, demanding attention, demanding focus. Caleb forced himself to look down. Amber eyes stared back, not battlefield eyes, not enemy eyes, Ghost's eyes. The tunnel slowly returned. The mountains returned. The snow returned. The present returned. His breathing stabilized. The shaking faded. The terror retreated. Several minutes passed before Caleb could speak. "You did it again." Ghost's tail moved once. The dog remained pressed against him, refusing to leave, refusing to let go. Caleb crouched and wrapped both arms around the shepherd's neck. The gesture was rare. Caleb wasn't naturally affectionate. Years of military life had built emotional walls. Yet Ghost always found ways through them. The dog rested quietly against him. No judgment, no questions, just loyalty, unconditional loyalty. That evening, Caleb sat outside the tunnel entrance, watching sunset paint the mountains gold. Ghost lay nearby. The sky glowed orange behind the snowy peaks. For a moment, everything felt still, peaceful. Caleb thought about the years after Emily died, the isolation, the grief, the anger, the sleepless nights. Most people assumed Ghost had saved him in combat, and that was true. But the dog had also saved him afterward, again and again, in ways nobody else ever saw. The thoughts stayed with him long after darkness arrived. Later that night, as wind moved softly through the canyon, Caleb woke unexpectedly. No nightmare, no sound, just instinct. The tunnel was quiet, too quiet. He sat up. The stove glowed faintly. Moonlight filtered through the entrance. Ghost wasn't on his bed. Caleb looked around. The dog stood nearly 60 feet deeper inside the tunnel, motionless, watching. The same behavior again, the same place, the same darkness. Ghost didn't notice Caleb watching him. His attention remained fixed on something hidden beyond sight, something deep within the mountain. For several moments, the old shepherd simply stood there, listening, waiting. Then slowly he walked farther into the darkness, farther than usual, farther than ever before. Caleb frowned. A strange feeling settled into his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Curiosity, because Ghost never behaved without reason. Never. The dog eventually returned and lay beside the sleeping platform. Yet even then, his eyes occasionally drifted toward the deeper sections of the tunnel, toward the shadows, toward whatever had captured his attention. Caleb stared into the darkness for a long time. The mountain remained silent. Its secrets remained hidden, but something was changing. The signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Ghost had begun searching for something, and whatever it was, the old war dog seemed determined to find it. No matter how long it took, the next morning, Ghost was already awake when Caleb opened his eyes. That alone was unusual. Normally, the German shepherd slept soundly until Caleb stirred. But now the dog stood near the deeper section of the tunnel, watching, waiting, his attention fixed on the darkness. The same place, the same direction, the same mystery. Caleb sat up on the sleeping platform. The stove had burned low during the night. Cold air lingered inside the tunnel. Ghost immediately glanced toward him, then looked back toward the shadows, as if reminding him, as if saying, "It's still there, whatever it was." Caleb rubbed his eyes. "You've got something on your mind, don't you?" Ghost's ears twitched. The dog remained focused. The behavior had become impossible to ignore. For nearly 2 weeks now, Ghost had returned repeatedly to the same section of the tunnel, not wandering, not exploring, investigating. The difference mattered. Years of military work had taught Caleb how working dogs behaved when they believed something important was hidden, and Ghost was behaving exactly that way. Yet there was no obvious explanation, no scent of animals, no visible movement, no strange sounds, nothing. Just a wall of old stone deep inside an abandoned railroad tunnel. Still, the old SEAL trusted one thing above all else: Ghost's instincts, and Ghost's instincts were rarely wrong. That afternoon, Caleb followed him. The deeper section of the tunnel felt different. The air seemed cooler, the darkness thicker. Moisture dripped slowly from the ceiling. Echoes lingered longer. Ghost moved ahead, confident, purposeful. Eventually he stopped beside a rough section of wall, nearly 80 feet from the entrance. The rock appeared ordinary, a mixture of stone and old earth, packed together decades earlier by natural shifts inside the mountain. Ghost pressed his nose against it, sniffed carefully, then scratched once, twice, 3 times. Caleb crouched beside him. The flashlight beam swept across the surface. Nothing. No cracks large enough for an animal. No hidden opening. No visible clue. Ghost whined softly. The sound immediately caught Caleb's attention. The dog rarely whined, especially not like this. There was urgency in it, frustration, almost desperation. "What is it, partner?" Ghost scratched harder. Small particles of dirt fell from the wall. The dog continued digging. Caleb reached out and touched the stone. Cold, solid, normal. At least it seemed normal. After several minutes, he finally stood. "Not today." Ghost looked disappointed. The dog remained beside the wall long after Caleb returned to work. As the days passed, the behavior intensified. Every morning, every afternoon, every evening, Ghost returned. The wall became his obsession. The tunnel became divided into 2 worlds. The front section where Caleb worked and lived, and the back section where Ghost searched. The routine became strangely familiar, so familiar that Caleb eventually stopped questioning it, until the injury happened. The storm arrived just after sunset, another Bitterroot blizzard, heavy snow, strong wind. Temperatures dropping rapidly. The tunnel remained safe, protected, warm enough. Caleb spent the evening repairing equipment near the stove. Ghost was absent again, somewhere deeper inside. Hours passed. Eventually Caleb heard him return, but something sounded wrong. The dog's footsteps seemed uneven, slower, labored. Caleb immediately looked up. Ghost emerged from the darkness. The shepherd was limping. Fear shot through Caleb instantly. He crossed the tunnel in seconds. "What happened?" Ghost sat down. His right front paw was bleeding, not severely, but enough. Caleb's heart sank. The injury wasn't from ice or a sharp rock outside. The wound came from repeated digging. The paw pad had been scraped raw. Ghost had literally injured himself, trying to reach whatever lay behind that wall. The realization stunned Caleb. The dog had worked himself bloody, without command, without reward, driven entirely by instinct. Caleb carefully cleaned the wound. Ghost endured the treatment patiently, never pulling away, never complaining. Yet throughout the entire process, the shepherd kept glancing toward the deeper tunnel, toward the wall, toward the mystery. Even injured, he wanted to return. The sight affected Caleb more than he expected, because Ghost wasn't stubborn by nature. He was disciplined, calculated, deliberate. If the dog believed something was there, maybe something really was. That night, Caleb couldn't stop thinking about it. The storm intensified outside. Wind roared through the canyon. Snow hammered the entrance. The stove crackled steadily. Ghost slept beside the platform, his injured paw wrapped carefully. For hours, Caleb stared into the darkness, listening, thinking. Finally, he made a decision. Tomorrow he would investigate properly, not because he believed treasure waited behind the wall, not because he expected a miracle, because Ghost deserved to be taken seriously. The next morning they returned together, flashlight in hand, toolkit over his shoulder. Ghost immediately led the way. Despite the injury, the dog moved eagerly. His tail wagged for the first time in days. The wall waited exactly where it always had, silent, ordinary, unremarkable. Caleb examined it carefully. This time he noticed something unusual. A faint difference in color, subtle, easy to miss. Part of the wall appeared slightly newer than surrounding stone. Not much, just enough. The discovery made him pause. Ghost immediately began pawing at the spot again. Caleb grabbed a small handpick, tapped lightly. The sound echoed differently, not hollow, but different. His pulse quickened. Maybe there really was something hidden behind it. Hours passed. Caleb removed loose dirt, small rocks, debris. The work was slow, careful. The tunnel was old. The last thing he wanted was a collapse. Ghost watched every movement, completely focused, completely invested, as if the dog already knew the outcome. By late afternoon, a narrow crack had appeared. Nothing dramatic. Just a thin fracture running across part of the wall. Yet Ghost became excited immediately. The shepherd sniffed intensely, then barked once. A single sharp bark. The first he'd given at the wall. Caleb froze. Ghost almost never barked without reason. The sound echoed through the tunnel. Then silence returned. A strange silence. The kind that settles before something changes. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the mountain seemed to be holding its breath. The crack widened slightly. A few pebbles rolled across the floor. Ghost stepped backward, ears forward, body tense, watching, waiting. The same way he once watched suspicious packages overseas. The same way he once watched danger. Caleb felt it too now. Something was there. Not imagination, not coincidence. Something. Neither of them moved for several seconds. Then a low rumble echoed through the tunnel. The sound seemed to come from inside the wall itself. Caleb immediately grabbed Ghost's collar. The old SEAL instincts activated. Back. Ghost obeyed. They retreated several feet. The rumble continued. Stone shifted. Dust drifted from above. The crack spread farther. Slowly, relentlessly, the mountain was moving. And for the first time since Ghost began digging, Caleb realized the dog might have been right all along. Something was hidden behind that wall. Something buried for decades. Something waiting to be found. The rumbling grew louder. Another stone fell. Then another. Ghost stared without blinking. His entire body focused on the collapsing section. Because after weeks of searching, weeks of digging, weeks of refusing to give up, the old war dog was finally about to uncover the secret he had sensed from the beginning. And neither Caleb nor Ghost was prepared for what lay on the other side. The rumbling continued. Stone groaned somewhere inside the mountain. Dust drifted through the beam of Caleb's flashlight. Small rocks tumbled from the wall and bounced across the tunnel floor. Ghost stood perfectly still beside him, alert, focused, waiting. The same way he had waited before breaching buildings overseas. The same way he had waited before danger revealed itself. Another crack echoed through the darkness. Then suddenly a section of the wall gave way. The collapse wasn't violent, it was almost gentle. Several large stones shifted outward. A cloud of dust filled the air, and behind the wall a dark opening appeared. Silence followed. Complete silence. Even the mountain seemed to pause. Caleb slowly lowered the flashlight. His pulse thundered inside his chest. Ghost moved first. The dog stepped forward, sniffed carefully, then looked back. The familiar expression, ready. Caleb understood immediately. Together, like always, they approached the opening. The hidden passage was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to enter comfortably. Cold air flowed from inside. Not fresh air, old air. Air trapped for decades, perhaps longer. Caleb shined the flashlight through the gap. The beam disappeared into darkness. His curiosity overwhelmed caution. Slowly he squeezed through. Ghost followed immediately. The space beyond opened into a hidden chamber. Caleb stopped. For several moments he simply stared. The room was larger than he expected. Nearly 20 feet across. Natural stone walls surrounded it. The ceiling arched overhead. Old support beams stood in several corners. The wood appeared ancient but surprisingly intact. Dust coated everything. The chamber looked untouched, frozen in time, as though someone had entered long ago and never returned. Ghost began exploring immediately. His nose moved constantly. Every scent mattered, every detail. Meanwhile, Caleb slowly turned in a circle. The flashlight revealed objects scattered throughout the chamber. Wooden crates, metal containers, rusted tools, fragments of equipment, the remains of another era. His pulse quickened. This wasn't a natural cave. Someone had used this place. Someone had hidden it deliberately. The farther he explored, the more evidence appeared. A lantern, old railroad spikes, broken surveying instruments, weathered maps pinned beneath fallen debris. Ghost suddenly barked. One sharp bark. Caleb turned instantly. The dog stood beside a rusted metal lockbox. Half buried beneath dust, the box looked old, very old. Its hinges were covered in corrosion. The lock had long since deteriorated. Caleb knelt beside it. For a moment he hesitated, then carefully opened the lid. Dust exploded into the air. Inside lay bundles of paper wrapped in oilcloth. His breath caught. Paper survived only when protected. Someone had wanted these documents preserved, carefully, deliberately. Caleb lifted the first bundle. The oilcloth crackled softly. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, from anticipation. He carefully unfolded the wrapping. Inside rested yellowed documents, maps, deeds, survey records, handwritten notes. The flashlight beam illuminated faded ink, names, dates, property boundaries, measurements, legal descriptions. The documents appeared decades old, perhaps older. Ghost watched closely. The dog seemed unusually interested, as if he somehow understood the importance of the discovery. Caleb turned another page, then another. Suddenly his breathing stopped. A familiar name stared back at him. Mercer. He blinked, looked again. Mercer. Not coincidence, not similarity. His family name. His heart accelerated. Caleb sat down heavily on a nearby crate. The chamber seemed smaller now. More significant. He continued reading. The handwriting dated back generations. Property surveys, land grants, boundary agreements. Records tied directly to the surrounding valley. Records involving the very land where his ranch stood. His mind struggled to process it. How could family documents end up hidden inside an abandoned railroad tunnel? Why would anyone place them here? Ghost suddenly moved again. The dog crossed the chamber and began sniffing near a collapsed support beam. His tail wagged once, then twice. The behavior caught Caleb's attention. Ghost pawed at a pile of debris. Carefully, persistently, Caleb approached. What is it now? Ghost continued digging. Several pieces of rotten wood shifted aside. Beneath them sat another container, smaller than the first, a steel strongbox. Unlike the other lockbox, this one remained sealed. The metal had rusted but survived remarkably well. Caleb stared. His pulse quickened again. Ghost stepped back, almost proudly. The old war dog had found another secret. Caleb laughed softly. You really weren't going to quit, were you? Ghost's tail wagged harder. The strong box took nearly 20 minutes to open. The hinges resisted. The metal protested. Eventually the lid creaked upward. Inside sat several journals, leather-bound, carefully preserved, protected from moisture, protected from time. Caleb picked up the first one. A date was written inside. His eyes widened, more than a century old. The journal belonged to a man named Samuel Mercer. Caleb froze. Samuel Mercer, his great-grandfather, the same man who originally acquired much of the family land, the same man whose stories had survived through generations, the same man Caleb had heard about since childhood. His hands shook slightly as he opened the first page. The handwriting remained surprisingly clear. The journal described land purchases, railroad negotiations, property disputes, surveying expeditions throughout the Bitterroot region. As Caleb read deeper, a picture slowly emerged. A complicated picture, a disturbing picture. One entry in particular caught his attention. The date, October 1921. The words made his stomach tighten. Samuel described discovering irregular land transfers involving neighboring properties, false boundary changes, manipulated records, missing documents, corruption. Even then, over 100 years ago, the journal mentioned names, locations, survey maps, evidence. Samuel had apparently gathered proof and hidden it here, inside the mountain. Caleb's breathing became shallow. He immediately returned to the lockbox. Compared documents, compared dates, compared maps. The connections became impossible to ignore. Property boundaries had been altered repeatedly over generations. Records had disappeared. Ownership histories had changed. Certain parcels of land, including portions surrounding Caleb's ranch, appeared affected. The implications felt enormous, potentially life-changing. Ghost sat beside him quietly, watching. The dog had no idea what the documents meant, yet somehow he had found them anyway. Hours passed. The storm outside continued. The hidden chamber remained silent. Caleb barely noticed time passing. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled itself. The journals connected to the maps. The maps connected to the deeds. The deeds connected to the valley. And the valley connected directly to the land developers had seized. The realization struck him like lightning. His ranch might never have been legally transferred the way the developers claimed. Some of the original ownership records contradicted modern filings. Not completely. Not enough to prove anything immediately, but enough to raise serious questions. Enough to reopen conversations. Enough to matter. Caleb leaned back against the stone wall. For several moments he simply stared into space. Months earlier he had lost everything. His home, his land, his future. Now, hidden inside a forgotten chamber beneath a mountain, evidence had emerged that could change everything. Not certainty, not victory, but possibility. For the first time since leaving the ranch, genuine hope entered his heart. Dangerous hope, fragile hope. Yet hope nonetheless. Ghost rested beside him. The old shepherd looked exhausted. His injured paw remained wrapped. Dust covered his fur. His muzzle looked grayer than ever. Caleb reached down and scratched behind his ears. The dog closed his eyes, content, satisfied. Mission accomplished. You found it. Ghost opened one eye. Caleb smiled. You actually found it. The dog thumped his tail against the floor. Outside, wind howled through the canyon. Inside, history had awakened. The mountain had protected its secret for generations. Now the secret belonged to Caleb, and somewhere beyond the snow-covered ridges, powerful people had no idea that the evidence buried beneath their success had just been uncovered. But they would soon learn. And when they did, everything would change once again. For 3 days, Caleb barely left the hidden chamber. The world outside seemed distant, almost unreal. Snow continued falling across the Bitterroot Mountains. Storms swept through the canyon. The tunnel remained isolated from civilization. Yet inside the chamber, history was speaking. And Caleb listened. Every journal revealed another piece of the puzzle. Every map connected to another record. Every document pointed toward a pattern stretching back generations. The deeper he read, the more impossible it became to dismiss. Samuel Mercer had known something was wrong. His great-grandfather had spent years documenting irregular land transfers throughout the valley. He had collected maps, recorded boundary changes, preserved correspondence, compared survey reports. Most importantly, he had hidden everything, deliberately. The evidence had been protected inside the mountain for over a century. Now it sat on a wooden crate illuminated by a camping lantern, and it had the potential to expose far more than Caleb ever imagined. Ghost rarely left his side. The old shepherd seemed unusually protective now. Whenever Caleb worked inside the hidden chamber, Ghost positioned himself near the entrance, watching, listening, guarding, as though he sensed the importance of what they had found. On the 4th day, Caleb made a decision. The evidence needed verification. He couldn't rely on assumptions. He needed someone qualified, someone trustworthy, someone outside the Mercer family. The next morning he drove into Red Creek. The town looked exactly as he remembered. Snow-covered rooftops, pickup trucks parked along Main Street, smoke drifting from chimneys, life continuing as though nothing had changed. Caleb felt strangely disconnected from it all. Ghost sat beside him in the truck, alert, watching. The dog always became more attentive around people. The first stop was the public library, a small brick building near the center of town. Inside worked a local historian named Eleanor Price. Eleanor was 72 years old, sharp-minded, meticulous, respected by nearly everyone. If anyone could evaluate century-old documents, it was her. When Caleb entered carrying a stack of copied maps, Eleanor immediately looked curious. "Well, this is unexpected." Caleb smiled faintly. "I need an expert opinion." Several hours later, Eleanor sat surrounded by maps and journals. Her expression grew more serious with every page. Finally, she looked up. "Where did you find these?" Caleb hesitated. "Inside an old tunnel." She blinked. "An old tunnel? Long story." Eleanor returned her attention to the documents. Several more minutes passed. Then she quietly said something that made Caleb's pulse quicken. "These appear authentic." The room suddenly felt smaller. "You sure?" "As sure as anyone can be without laboratory testing." She pointed toward one of the maps. "This survey predates several county records." Another page. "This boundary line doesn't match modern filings." Another. "This correspondence references disputes that never appeared in official archives." She leaned back. The historian's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Caleb, these documents raise serious questions." The hope that had been growing inside him strengthened. Not certainty, but possibility, real possibility. Eleanor wasn't finished. "There is someone else you should speak with." "Who?" "Harold Whitaker." The name sounded familiar. "He was a county surveyor." Eleanor nodded. "For 40 years. The next day, Caleb met Harold. The retired surveyor lived alone near the edge of town. His small house overlooked a frozen lake. Harold studied the documents carefully. Much like Eleanor, his reaction changed the longer he looked. Finally, he removed his glasses. His face had gone pale. "These records should not exist." Caleb frowned. "What does that mean?" Harold tapped one of the maps. "This survey contradicts several modern property lines." Another document. "This deed references acreage that disappeared from county records." Another. "This one is especially interesting." Caleb leaned forward. Harold looked directly at him. "If these documents are genuine, someone altered land records decades ago." The words hung heavily between them. Someone. Not a mistake. Not an accident. Someone. The implications were enormous and dangerous. Far more dangerous than Caleb initially realized. Because corruption involving valuable land rarely stayed buried willingly. The first sign of trouble arrived 3 days later. Caleb returned to the tunnel after gathering supplies. Something felt wrong immediately. Ghost sensed it too. The dog froze near the entrance, his ears lifted, his body stiffened. Caleb looked around. Nothing appeared damaged, nothing obvious. Then he noticed footprints, fresh footprints. Someone had been there. Someone had entered the canyon. His pulse accelerated. Ghost immediately began tracking. The dog moved carefully through the snow. The scent trail led directly to the tunnel entrance, then stopped. Whoever had visited had approached the tunnel, looked around and left. Nothing appeared stolen. Yet the message was clear. Someone knew. That night, neither Caleb nor Ghost slept much. The mountains suddenly felt less isolated, less safe. The following week brought more unsettling discoveries. A vehicle appeared repeatedly on logging roads near the canyon, always at a distance, always watching. A stranger asked questions about Caleb in town. Another stranger visited Eleanor's office asking about historical records. Coincidences began accumulating. Too many coincidences. One evening, Harold Whitaker called unexpectedly. His voice sounded nervous. "Caleb, what is it?" "I think someone broke into my garage." Caleb straightened. "What?" "Nothing was taken, then why call?" Harold hesitated. "Because the only thing disturbed was the box containing copies of your documents." Silence followed. Cold silence. The kind that settles before a storm. After hanging up, Caleb stared into the darkness outside the tunnel. The realization was impossible to ignore. The evidence mattered. Enough that somebody wanted it. Enough that somebody feared it. Ghost slowly stood beside him. The shepherd stared toward the canyon entrance, watching, waiting. The same behavior he displayed before potential threats. The old instincts remained sharp. A week later, trouble arrived in person. Caleb had driven toward town to meet Harold and Eleanor again. Snow covered the roads. The mountains glittered beneath pale winter sunlight. Halfway there, he crossed an old wooden bridge spanning a frozen creek. Ghost suddenly growled, a low warning. Instantly, Caleb became alert. The dog stared toward a parked SUV near the far end of the bridge. 3 men stood beside it, waiting. Something about the scene felt wrong. Not openly threatening, not yet, just wrong. As Caleb approached, one of the men stepped forward. "Mr. Mercer?" Caleb stopped. Ghost moved closer. The stranger smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "We hear you've been looking into some old records." Caleb said nothing. The man's smile faded. Sometimes old records cause unnecessary confusion. The message was obvious. The threat hidden beneath politeness. Ghost stepped between Caleb and the stranger. The shepherd's posture changed instantly. Protective, focused, ready. The man noticed. His confidence weakened slightly. "That's quite a dog." Caleb's voice remained calm. "Best move along." For several tense seconds, nobody moved. Then another man stepped forward, too quickly, too aggressively. Ghost reacted instantly. The shepherd lunged forward, not attacking, but placing himself directly between Caleb and the advancing stranger. A sharp movement followed. A slip on ice, a collision, chaos lasting only seconds. The men retreated immediately afterward, returning to their vehicle, leaving as quickly as they arrived. But not before one thing happened. Ghost limped. Caleb's stomach dropped. The dog had injured his leg during the confrontation. Not severe, but enough. Enough to remind Caleb that this was no longer merely a legal dispute. The people involved were nervous, desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. That night, Caleb sat beside Ghost inside the tunnel. The dog rested comfortably despite the injury. Caleb gently checked the leg again. Nothing broken, thankfully. Still, anger simmered beneath the surface. Not because of himself, because Ghost had been hurt. The old shepherd had spent years protecting him, years saving him, years standing between him and danger. Now it was happening again. Caleb looked toward the hidden chamber, toward the documents, toward the truth buried inside the mountain. The evidence was bigger than Derek, much bigger. Derek had merely been one piece, one player, one beneficiary. The corruption stretched farther, deeper, more powerful. And whoever stood behind it had finally realized their secret was no longer hidden. Outside, snow drifted across the canyon. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Ghosts slept nearby, but Caleb remained awake because, for the first time since finding the chamber, he understood something important. The battle ahead would not simply be about reclaiming his ranch. It would be about exposing a system that had been manipulating land, records, and lives for generations. And powerful people were preparing to fight back. The mountain had guarded its secret for over 100 years. Now the secret was awake, and so were the men who wanted it buried forever. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the Bitterroot Mountains. The days grew longer. The snow remained deep in the higher elevations, but patches of earth had begun appearing in the valley below. For Caleb Mercer, however, the season no longer mattered. His life had become a storm of its own. The evidence hidden inside the mountain was no longer just a collection of old papers. It had become a weapon, a truth powerful enough to threaten people who had spent decades benefiting from lies. And those people were fighting back. But for the first time since losing his ranch, Caleb wasn't fighting alone. The turning point came unexpectedly. 3 days after the confrontation at the frozen bridge, Eleanor Price made a phone call. Then another, then several more. She contacted historical preservation groups, former colleagues, university researchers, survey experts, people she trusted, people who cared about facts. The response was immediate. The documents fascinated them. The journals fascinated them even more. Within weeks, experts from across Montana began examining copies of Samuel Mercer's records. Every review reached the same conclusion. The materials appeared authentic. The implications were enormous. And word began spreading. At first it moved quietly. Academic circles, historical societies, property researchers. Then a local newspaper published a small story. Former Navy SEAL discovers hidden family records inside abandoned mountain tunnel. The article wasn't dramatic, just factual, yet it caught attention, particularly among people already suspicious of recent development projects in the valley. Questions began multiplying. Soon reporters wanted interviews, lawyers wanted access, researchers wanted copies. And suddenly, the secret hidden inside the mountain belonged to more than Caleb. It belonged to the public, that terrified the people who had something to lose. One evening, Caleb returned from town and found 2 county vehicles parked near the old ranch. The sight immediately raised alarms. The construction project had slowed significantly in recent weeks. Survey work had stopped. Permits were being reviewed. Questions were being asked. The developers no longer looked confident. They looked nervous. That nervousness soon turned into panic. The first major breakthrough arrived through Harold Whitaker. The retired surveyor spent days comparing Samuel Mercer's maps to modern county records. Eventually, he found something extraordinary. A sequence of boundary revisions dating back nearly 40 years. Small changes, almost invisible individually, yet when combined they revealed a pattern. Certain land parcels had gradually shifted ownership through suspicious revisions. Each change appeared legal. Each change appeared insignificant. Together they represented thousands of acres, millions of dollars. And among those properties sat Caleb's ranch. The discovery triggered a formal investigation. State officials became involved. Independent surveyors entered the valley. Records were subpoenaed. Archives reopened. The deeper investigators dug, the uglier the truth became. Corruption, forgery, manipulation. Not everywhere, not everyone, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to change everything. Then came the national story. It began with a television interview. A veteran-focused news program heard about Caleb, a homeless former Navy SEAL, a loyal military dog, a hidden chamber inside a mountain, a century-old family secret. The story sounded unbelievable, yet every detail was true. The interview aired on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, millions of people had seen it. Viewers across the country watched Ghost resting beside Caleb inside the tunnel. They listened as Caleb described losing his ranch, losing his home, losing his wife's gravesite, and then finding evidence hidden by his great-grandfather. The reaction was overwhelming. Letters arrived, emails arrived, donations arrived. Most important of all, support arrived. Veterans organizations reached out immediately. Legal groups offered assistance. Property rights attorneys volunteered their services. People who had never met Caleb suddenly wanted to help. For months he had felt invisible. Now the entire country seemed to know his name. Ghost became something of a celebrity. Photographs of the scar-faced German shepherd appeared everywhere. Articles called him the dog who uncovered a century-old secret. Children sent him treats. Veterans sent him medals. One retired Marine even mailed a handmade leather collar engraved with 4 words, "Still on the mission." Caleb laughed when he read it. Ghost seemed mostly interested in the packages sent, but the collar fit perfectly. The legal battle intensified. Court hearings followed. Investigations expanded. More evidence emerged. More records surfaced. Eventually, investigators discovered financial connections between several development companies and local officials involved in previous land approvals. The pattern became impossible to deny. Public trust collapsed. Pressure mounted. And then Derek Mercer made his decision. He talked. The news stunned everyone. Facing his own legal troubles and mounting public scrutiny, Derek agreed to cooperate. For years he had believed powerful people would protect him. Now he realized they wouldn't. So he started telling the truth. Emails, contracts, meetings, financial arrangements. He revealed everything he knew. Not out of courage, not out of remorse, out of self-preservation. Still, the information proved devastating. Developers who once appeared untouchable suddenly found themselves under investigation. Executives resigned. Projects halted. Lawyers scrambled. The empire built on manipulated records began cracking apart. Throughout it all, Caleb remained focused on one thing: the ranch. Not revenge, not publicity. The ranch. One afternoon, he stood outside the courthouse in Helena. Snowmelt flowed through gutters. Spring sunlight reflected from nearby buildings. Ghost rested beside him, wearing the leather collar. Television crews crowded nearby. Reporters asked questions. Cameras followed every movement. The attention felt surreal. Months earlier, he had been sleeping inside an abandoned tunnel. Now journalists wanted interviews. Caleb ignored most of them. His priorities remained unchanged. Then his attorney emerged from the courthouse. A smile spread across her face. The expression told him everything before she spoke. We won. For several seconds, Caleb couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The words echoed inside his mind. We won. Years of legal complications remained possible. Additional hearings would follow. Further reviews would occur. But the decision had been made. Ownership rights were restored. Fraudulent transfers were invalidated. The ranch was his again. The valley erupted. News spread faster than wildfire. People celebrated throughout Red Creek. Veterans gathered at local diners. Neighbors who once watched helplessly from a distance now openly cheered. For the first time in many years, the community felt united. Not by politics, not by money, by justice. Several days later, Caleb returned to the ranch. The drive felt strangely familiar. Ghost rode beside him. The same road, the same mountains, the same valley. Yet everything felt different. The gates stood open. Construction equipment was gone. Survey markers had disappeared. Silence had returned. Caleb parked near the house. For several moments he remained seated, unable to move. Ghost finally nudged him, the same way he always did, the old dog practically saying, "Come on, let's go home." Together they stepped out. The wind carried the scent of spring. Grass was beginning to emerge beneath melting snow. Birds moved through the trees. The ranch looked wounded, but alive. Caleb slowly climbed the hill toward Emily's grave. Ghost remained beside him. Every step felt heavier than the last. Finally, he reached the marker. The stone remained exactly where he remembered. Sunlight touched the polished surface. For a long time, he simply stood there, silent. The mountains stretched beyond the valley, beautiful, endless, unchanged. A tear slipped down his cheek, then another. Not tears of grief, not this time. Relief. The kind that arrives after surviving a battle you never expected to win. Ghost sat quietly beside him. The old shepherd looked out across the ranch, across the land he had helped save. Because without Ghost, none of this would have happened. Without Ghost, the tunnel wall would have remained untouched. Without Ghost, the chamber would have remained hidden. Without Ghost, the truth would still be buried beneath stone. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's neck. "You did it, partner." Ghost leaned gently against him. The wind moved through the grass. The valley lay peaceful beneath the afternoon sun. The battle for the ranch was over. The battle for the truth had been won. But as Caleb stood beside Emily's grave, another realization slowly settled into his heart. The ranch was no longer the only home that mattered, because somewhere deep in the mountains, an old tunnel still waited. And soon, Caleb would have to decide where his future truly belonged. Spring arrived slowly in western Montana. Snow retreated from the valley floor. The Bitterroot Mountains remained capped in white, but green began returning to the meadows below. Creeks swelled with snowmelt. Wildflowers pushed through thawing earth. Life returned. And for the first time in many months, Caleb Mercer wasn't fighting for survival. The legal battle was over. The ranch belonged to him again. The developers were gone. The fraudulent transfers had been overturned. The corruption that had hidden behind paperwork and influence had been exposed. By every reasonable measure, Caleb had won. Yet as the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. He found himself driving back to the tunnel, again and again and again. At first, he told himself he was checking on the hidden chamber, protecting the documents, inspecting the property. But deep down, he knew the truth. The tunnel had become part of him, the place where he had rebuilt his life, the place where Ghost had saved him once more, the place where he had stopped being a victim and started becoming something else. One bright April morning, Caleb parked near the canyon entrance and stepped out of the truck. Ghost jumped down beside him. The old shepherd's injured leg had healed almost completely. A slight stiffness remained, a reminder of everything they had endured. The canyon looked different now. The frozen waterfalls had become rushing streams. Bird song echoed through the trees. Sunlight filtered through the pines. The place felt alive. Together they walked toward the tunnel. The familiar path felt almost like coming home. When they reached the entrance, Caleb stopped. The stone opening stood exactly as before. Silent, patient, waiting. Ghost walked inside first. The dog knew every corner now, every scent, every shadow. Caleb followed. The tunnel felt warmer, brighter, comfortable. The improvements he had made over winter remained: the stone floor, the shelves, the sleeping platform, the stove, all of it still there. Evidence of survival, evidence of purpose. For a long moment he stood in silence. Then he realized something. This place had never represented homelessness. Not really. It represented transformation. The tunnel wasn't where his life ended. It was where it began again. That realization stayed with him. Days later, he shared the thought with Eleanor Price. They sat outside Murphy's diner drinking coffee, while Ghost rested beneath the table. Eleanor listened carefully, then smiled. "You've already made your decision." Caleb frowned. "What decision?" The one you're pretending you haven't made. He laughed softly. I'm not pretending. Yes, you are. She pointed toward Ghost. The dog was asleep, peaceful, content. Every time you talk about the ranch, you sound grateful. She paused. Every time you talk about the tunnel, you sound alive. The words lingered. Because they were true. Over the following weeks, visitors began arriving. Not tourists, not curiosity seekers, veterans. Men and women who had heard his story. People struggling with PTSD. People struggling with grief. People struggling with the invisible battles nobody else could see. Some came because of the news coverage. Others because veterans' organizations recommended him. Many arrived carrying burdens Caleb recognized immediately. The 1,000-yard stare, the exhaustion, the isolation, the feeling of being disconnected from the world. One afternoon, a Marine veteran named Ryan visited. He spent 2 hours sitting beside the tunnel entrance, talking quietly with Caleb. When he finally left, tears stood in his eyes. I haven't talked to anyone about this in 8 years. Caleb understood, because he had once been exactly the same. A week later, another veteran arrived, then another, then several more. The visits continued. Each one reminded Caleb of something important. The tunnel had helped him heal. Maybe it could help others too. The idea grew slowly. Then, all at once, 3 months later, work began. Not large-scale construction, not commercial development, nothing like that. Something simpler, something meaningful. With support from veterans groups, local volunteers, and community donors, the area around the tunnel was carefully improved. A small meeting lodge was built near the canyon entrance. Trails were cleared. Additional sleeping cabins were added farther down the canyon. The hidden chamber remained protected and preserved. The tunnel itself stayed largely unchanged. Caleb insisted on that. Its imperfections mattered. Its history mattered. Its authenticity mattered. The place had saved his life. He refused to let it become something artificial. By midsummer, the project had a name. The Ghost Ridge Veterans Retreat. The name embarrassed Caleb slightly, but nobody would accept alternatives. Especially after learning the truth. Without Ghost, none of it would have existed. Without Ghost, the hidden chamber would never have been found. Without Ghost, the evidence would never have surfaced. Without Ghost, Caleb might never have survived the winter. The dog had earned the honor. Visitors arrived throughout the summer. Veterans, families, widows, first responders, people carrying invisible wounds, people searching for peace. The canyon offered something rare: silence, space, understanding. No one was forced to explain themselves. No one was judged. People simply came, sat beside campfires, walked mountain trails, shared stories, or didn't. Healing happened in different ways. Caleb understood that better than anyone. One evening near the end of August, he drove back to the ranch. The setting sun painted the valley gold. The horses grazed peacefully. The fences had been repaired. The house looked stronger than ever. Everything was exactly where it belonged, including Emily. He climbed the hill slowly. Ghost walked beside him. The old shepherd moved more carefully now. Age was catching up, but his eyes remained bright. His spirit remained strong. Together they reached the grave. Caleb sat beneath the cottonwood tree. The breeze moved gently through the branches. The valley stretched endlessly below. For a long time he simply sat there, thinking, remembering, feeling grateful. Eventually he smiled. I figured it out. Ghost rested beside him. Caleb looked toward the mountains, toward the distant canyon, toward the tunnel hidden among the pines. I kept trying to get back what I lost. The wind whispered through the leaves, but that wasn't the point. He looked at Emily's marker. The words came easier now, without pain, without guilt, without anger. I thought the ranch was my future. His smile deepened. It wasn't. The realization felt peaceful. The ranch mattered. Emily mattered. The past mattered. But purpose mattered too. And purpose had found him inside a forgotten mountain tunnel. As sunset deepened, Caleb and Ghost made the long walk back down the hill. The valley glowed beneath orange light. The mountains stood timeless against the horizon, beautiful, strong, enduring. Weeks later, autumn returned. The first hints of winter appeared high in the peaks. One evening, Caleb sat at the entrance of the tunnel, the same place where he had once stood broken and homeless. Ghost rested beside him. The old shepherd's head lay across his boots. The canyon was quiet, the world peaceful. Below, lights from the retreat cabins glowed softly among the trees. Veterans laughed around distant campfires. Voices drifted through the evening air. Life, healing, community. Everything that had seemed impossible only months earlier. Caleb looked across the mountains, then down at Ghost. The scar-faced shepherd opened one eye, just enough to make sure Caleb was still there. The same habit, the same loyalty, the same love. Caleb smiled. "You know, partner?" Ghost's tail thumped once. "You were right all along." The dog closed his eye again, satisfied. Mission complete. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. Golden light faded into twilight. And as darkness settled gently over the canyon, Caleb finally understood the truth. They had taken his home. His dog had found the truth. Together, they had built something greater than either one of them had lost. The tunnel had never stolen his future. It had given him one. And beside him, beneath the quiet Montana sky, the old war dog who had saved him twice rested peacefully at last. The mountain kept its silence. The stars appeared overhead. And for the first time in many years, Caleb Mercer was exactly where he belonged. If you believe loyalty like Ghosts still exists in this world, comment 1 below. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life after losing something important, comment 0. Sometimes justice takes time, but as Caleb learned, truth has a way of finding its way home. And if stories about courage, dignity, and standing your ground mean something to you, subscribe and join us for the next journey.